A strong hope has long been entertained, founded on the heroic struggle of the Greeks, that they would succeed in their contest and resume their equal station among the nations of the earth. Their cause and their name have protected them from dangers which ere this might have overwhelmed any other people. From the facts which have come to our knowledge, there is good cause to believe that their enemy, Turkey, has lost forever all dominion over them, that Greece will again become an independent nation. That she may attain that rank is the object of our most ardent wishes.
On December 2, 1823, President James Monroe submitted his annual message to Congress. What the president had to say about Greece appeared innocent and straightforward. It was not. In the context of prior cabinet discussions, and also in the context of strong support for the Greek cause among educated and politically active Americans, Monroe's statements were quite ambiguous. He seemed to come down on all sides of the issue of extending tangible support for the Greek people. This is what he had to say on the subject of Greek freedom from Turkish rule. A strong hope has long been entertained, founded on the. Monroe coupled his general support for freedom with the more specific ethnocentric appeal generated by the Greek cause. What the Greeks seemed to have accomplished was very different from what any other people might be. Monroe had every reason to know that his statement could only build pressure to support the Greek cause. For example, Greek exceptionalism had figured prominently in Everett's North American Review article. It had also stood out in the eloquent plea for diplomatic recognition contained in the December 1823 petition to Congress from the Philadelphia Committee. Did Monroe mean to suggest that this exceptionalism had earned the Greek people the right to expect tangible support from the people of the United States, and above all, from their government? Both Everett and the Philadelphia Committee had joined the two propositions. Monroe continued, from the facts which have come to our knowledge there. Monroe's words indicated that Greece had, or was very close to having, de facto independence. In the past, this status had been used to justify opening diplomatic recognition with the governments of the newly formed Latin American republics, governments like that of the Greeks, founded on popular sovereignty and republicanism. The criteria that the United States had used to justify extending diplomatic recognition to the Latin American republics provided a ready and well-known point of reference. As Monroe clearly stated it, Turkey had lost its sovereignty over Greece. Quite possibly what might be missing for a state of true independence was satisfactory evidence that the Greeks had actually established a functioning government, one which in fact was exercising the powers of a sovereign state. This may signify what he meant by independence, since the Turks allegedly had lost all dominion over them. Still, there remained a basic ambiguity in Monroe's words. It was not clear whether the extension of diplomatic recognition to a Greek republic violated the principle of neutrality and non-involvement. Although the issue of diplomatic recognition for the Greeks does not appear at all in his message, it was clear, however, that there was strong public support for sending an official delegation to Greece for the very purpose of initiating official United States recognition of what Monroe had alleged was a de facto government of the Greek people.
In response to Monroe's question of what the United States government should do to support the cause of freedom, Jefferson, in June 1823, advised as follows: "I have ever deemed it fundamental for the United States never to take an active part in the quarrels of Europe. Their political interests are entirely distinct from ours." In essence, Jefferson had urged Monroe to speak out in favor of freedom, but to stay out of any direct involvement in the struggles for freedom in the Old World. Such restraint, according to Jefferson, would enhance the ability of the nation to strengthen its own freedom, and thereby put itself in a better position to support the cause of freedom in the New World. In Jefferson's words, "Indeed, for the sake of the world, we ought not to increase the jealousies or draw upon ourselves the power of this formidable conspiracy." Just one day before Monroe delivered his annual message to Congress, Jefferson wrote the Greek nationalist Corée in these terms: "No people sympathize more feelingly than ours with the sufferings of your countrymen. None offer more sincere and ardent prayers to heaven for their success. And nothing indeed but the government, never to entangle us with the broils of fundamental principles of Europe, could ever restrain our generous youth from taking part in your holy cause." Jefferson went on, "Possessing ourselves of the combined blessings of liberty and order, we wish the same to other countries, and to none more than yours, which, the first of civilized nations, presented examples of what man should be." On December 5th of 1823, the National Intelligencer reported that a military ball would be given in New York on the 8th of January, the surplus proceeds of which are to be added to the fund to be raised in New York in aid of the cause of the Greeks. The anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans will be selected for this fête for freedom. At the time, the anniversary of the Battle of New Orleans was a national holiday. It was a time to reaffirm the bravery Americans had demonstrated in their own struggles for freedom. Similar balls in support of the Greek cause would be held in other cities. On January 3rd, a New York paper article entitled "Greek Fire" stated that a portrait of General Andrew Jackson was to be placed in the dancing room on the 8th of January, when the profits of the ball are to be given to the Greek Fund. The symbolism of support for the freedom of the Greeks and an affirmation of America's own freedom in the War of 1812 was not only hard to ignore symbolically. Heroic defense of freedom in Greece and heroic defense of freedom in America had become fused. The potential for political benefit to General Jackson is manifest. On December 6, Webster wrote Everett, "There was, I believe, a meeting of the members of the administration yesterday on the affairs of Greece." Webster ended by telling Everett that Calhoun is as much in favor of Greece as Everett is. One must ponder how Monroe and Adams would have felt if they had proof that a member of the cabinet had repeatedly divulged the substance of their private discussions to a leader of Congress. In his letter, Webster also told Everett, "I have spoken to several gentlemen on the subject of a motion respecting Greece. All of them approve of it." To judge by Webster's remarks, the momentum of support for extending diplomatic recognition to a Greek republic was strong, broad-based, and apt to carry the day. Webster submitted his resolution on the floor of the House on December 8. It read as follows: "Resolved that provision ought to be made by law for defraying the expense incident to appointment of an agent or commissioner to Greece whenever the President shall deem it important to make such appointment." In his explanatory remarks, Webster claimed he was responding to the President's message of December 2 in reference to the sacrifices and sufferings of that heroic people, sacrificing which ought to excite the sympathy of every liberal-minded man in Europe, as well as in this country. Webster's next comments are ambiguous, but also reconcilable with Monroe's statements in the annual message. "We ought not to be restrained from expressing ourselves, with freedom, what are our views in relation to the Greek cause, so far as it may be done without committing ourselves to the contest." Webster then stated his hope that there was at least one government which does entertain a proper view of that barbarous despotism which under the eyes of Europe had been permitted by a system of the foulest authority to attempt to crush an interesting nation. Webster asked that the resolution lie on the table for deliberate consideration of the House.
Procedurally, this left open when and whether the motion would be called up for debate. It would, in fact, be debated at great length the following month. Meanwhile, political leaders had time to sort out what they would say either to support or to oppose the resolution. More specifically, they had the time to ponder whether they accepted Webster's proposal that the United States government should express with freedom its support for the Greek people by more than words. Webster had used the words with freedom in the context of moving toward the act of diplomatic recognition for a sovereign and independent Greek state. There were challenges in any course that Monroe and his Secretary of State took. Not least was the possibility that the two would end up with different points of view. In his annual message, Monroe had supported the basic principles of neutrality he and Adams had agreed upon. Still, Monroe's statements on the de facto independence of Greece seemed almost to encourage the very situation that was now unfolding. Also, there was an important gap between the principle of acting only where the interests of the nation would benefit Adams' frame of reference and Monroe's apparent preference of acting to support the cause of freedom, unless and until such a course risked demonstrable harm to the nation. As the year drew to a close, the momentum of public support for the Greek cause and the related pressure to extend diplomatic recognition to a Greek republic was very strong. Moreover, the news from Greece was positive. The Greeks were winning. On December 15th, the National Intelligencer reprinted an article from the New York Commercial Advertiser entitled "Latest from the Greeks, the Affairs of the Greeks Go On Well." The evidence seemed to support Monroe's statement of a de facto independence. Press reports also reminded readers of the horrific atrocities committed against the Greek people. On December 20th, Niles Register published what it called a report from the Scio Custom House. According to Niles, it documented that 41,200 women and children had been sold as slaves. The fathers, brothers, and husbands of these women and children met with a more enviable fate and were butchered. On December 19th, Webster called upon the House to consider his motion on sending an official mission of inquiry to Greece. On the same date, the Annals of Congress reported that the President had caused the Secretary of State to send to the House papers dealing with his correspondence with the Greeks. The letter that Adams wrote to Laureatus in August 1823 was about to become a matter of public record. Niles Register published the letter on January 10th. Significantly, the published document indicated that Adams addressed Laureatus as envoy of the Provisional Government of Greece. On December 29th, Webster wrote to Everett positive words of encouragement. My resolution was evidently well received by the House. Webster indicates he would call it up in about a week. Webster also asked to be promptly informed if there was any negative news from Greece. In an undated letter of roughly this time, Joel Poinsett wrote Webster to advise him of the President's position on the upcoming debate on Webster's motion. I saw the President and showed him the modification you proposed. He still objects on the ground that such matters ought to originate with the executive, and your resolution goes further than he wishes. He intended only to express his wishes for the success of the Greeks.
To judge by Poinsett's statement, Monroe had taken a firm position. The legislature was not the fulcrum for initiating the course the nation should pursue in the conduct of its foreign affairs, at least not in the case of extending diplomatic recognition to a new state. Poinsett then proceeded to say that he, Poinsett, will propose a substitute for your amendment. Webster was on notice that Monroe might well act to deflect and defeat Webster's resolution. Webster was also on notice that Monroe had found a champion to speak for him in the House. Webster was not deterred. On January 2nd, he wrote Everett, I send you the answer to the call for information respecting the Greeks. If I mistake not, it will, with the country, very much raise the Greek stock. Webster went on to allay concerns over objections of the Secretary of State to the upcoming congressional debate. I think we can disregard that when we see the Secretary of State's correspondence with a Greek agent working in London, wishing him and his nation all success in publishing his correspondence. Webster concluded by assuring Everett, we shall have the nation if Monroe does not go along. Webster told Everett, he will soon be obliged to do so. The parallels with earlier debates over whether to extend diplomatic recognition to the new Latin American republics are striking. There was the matter of principle. Was the United States government to impose on the nation sacrifices for the cause of freedom outside its borders? There was the matter of power. Did the Constitution give the power to make the determination of extending diplomatic recognition to the executive, or did it intend the legislature to lead the executive in the exercise of this power? There was also the matter of political interest. What advantages accrued to a particular statesman from taking a position either in favor of or against the extension of diplomatic recognition? To judge by appearances at the beginning of 1824, the crucible within which these determinations would be made was the upcoming debate in the House of Representatives. There was, of course, a court of appeal. The year 1824 was an election year. As the year began, it was quite reasonable to assume that the issue of support for the Greek cause would become prominent in that upcoming political contest. The intensity of organized public interest in the cause, the attention to the issue by the leading statesmen of the day, both attest to this prospect. More concretely, the jockeying for political position in Webster's letter is palpable. Looking back, it is intriguing to speculate who would have won and who would have lost politically if Webster's motion had been approved by the House.
In his book on the Monroe Doctrine, May offered the following comment: the recognition of Greece would not only deprive Clay of a talking point, but would create a dilemma for Adams, for Adams would either have to decide to support Edward Everett, which would have outraged Republicans, or alienate himself from his friends, pushing New England Federalists into John Calhoun's camp. South Carolina was John Calhoun's state. At the same sitting, Mr. Webster lay on the table a memorial from the citizens of Massachusetts urging similar support for the Greek cause. One must pause here and marvel at the political and organizational skills that were necessary to orchestrate the concentrated outpouring of support for the Greek cause that occurred in late 1823 and early 1824. Synchronized mass meetings in widely separated cities, engagement of political leaders in the various states to enact petitions to Congress, widespread newspaper support for the Greek cause did not just happen. To manage such an enterprise successfully bespeaks a high level of competence. To manage such an enterprise in an age of slow and inadequate communications and strong regional tensions is all the more noteworthy. In 1824, leading political leaders tended to take positions on the issue of Greek independence that coincided with their domestic political interests. John Calhoun and Henry Clay were two examples of this. And certainly Webster's eloquence could only add to his stature as a leading proponent of American nationalism. None of them had to live with the practical consequences of any moves to extend diplomatic recognition to a Greek republic. Webster, like Clay before him, appeared to bend the definition of neutrality to include diplomatic recognition of a de facto independent nation as an automatic act, not a discretionary one. In the nation's future, there would remain a temptation to exploit and bend definitions to serve the interests of expediency. The need to garner popular support in order to exercise political power on occasion risked making the temptation irresistible. In his annual message, Monroe carefully avoided taking positions that were controversial. He rose above the fray of political groups vying for power and control. He presided, but he did not lead. In the case of diplomatic recognition for the Greeks, this seeming passivity did risk danger to the nation. Webster's motion just might have passed. If it had, damaging consequences to the nation just might have taken place. Monroe appeared unwilling to expend significant political capital to lead the nation in determining whether to support steps leading to diplomatic recognition of a Greek republic. In the case of Greece itself, this led to intensified political conflict over the proper course to follow in the conduct of the nation's foreign affairs.
By participating in the debate, many of the leading statesmen of the day brought closure to their positions on the Greek cause. They said what they had to say, and did so well before the presidential election of 1824. This tended to diffuse the role that the Greek cause would play in the election itself. It was not to become an important issue in the upcoming campaign. What Webster and Clay said on the matter, what Calhoun and Gallatin said more privately, had little apparent impact on their political fortunes. Much more important, the debate itself turned out to be a unifying, not a divisive issue. The statesmen who spoke for and against the resolution used a common frame of reference to support their positions. What constituted the substance of manly virtue, what constituted an affirmation of a shared religion, and the unquestioned acceptance that citizenship was founded on moral duty rather than self-interest were all principles that they shared. The fact that people who supported and those who opposed official United States involvement in the Greek cause all expressed allegiance to what they said was a common Christian religion reinforced feelings of national identity. There was, of course, at least one issue that history and the interpretation of events by future historians most certainly will not resolve. This is the background. On November 28, Daniel Webster wrote to Edward Everett, "I cannot say how much I am obligated to you for your recent attention to my request for information on Greece and your offer of future aid." Webster went on to speak of some sort of agency to Greece. Webster indicated to Everett, "You may be offered this. The subject has been under consideration by the President, and also your name has been mentioned to him as the fittest person for such a service." In his letter, Webster specifically stated that J. Calhoun has urged the President to make the appointment. On January 27, Adams noted in his diary, "Mr. Webster, upon his Greek resolution, which was left undisposed yesterday by the Committee of the Whole rising without taking any question of it. I told Webster that when the resolution was finally acted upon, I should be glad to converse with him upon it. He expressed a disposition to have the conversation now, and I told him of the reasons why I had been adverse to his resolution. He said Southard and Calhoun had both encouraged him to offer it, and the President himself had told him he had no objection to it being made." Put in the context of the President's annual message to Congress, a mystery surfaces. Did Monroe favor efforts in Congress to sanction an official mission to Greece? To judge by Adams' diary entry detailing his conversation with Mr. Fuller, the answer to this question is no. To judge by Webster's comments, the answer is yes. To judge by the wording Monroe used in his annual message, the answer is maybe. And to judge by what Monroe allegedly told Poinsett, the answer is no. It is unlikely that new facts will surface from the available archives to dispel the mystery of how America responded to what Everett, in his October 1823 North American Review article, had termed the struggle of the crescent against the cross. Although the available record is good, it is by no means complete.